Okay. Am I allowed to rant for a second? I don't know. This is a new format, I guess. There's not really much of a plan. I really want to talk about reboot culture. I know everyone's talking about it, but there are so many. There are so many, and this needs to be discussed. Also, if you've never been here before, hi, I'm Angie. I talk about pop culture, movies, TV shows, life. Reboots. I think it's very obvious at this point that Gen Z and millennials are obsessed with nostalgia. I mean, my whole TikTok account is like a nostalgia account. We talk about like old TV shows, old fashion trends, so on and so forth. You can tell this nostalgia trend with like the way companies are bringing back old collections from like the 90s and 2000s, different styles of shoes. New Balance is back. In a really big way. It's working. The nostalgia thing is working. And I think that, TV networks, movie makers, I don't know what they're called, production companies are seeing that and really trying to capitalize with all of these TV reboots. We've seen Raven's Home. We've seen Gossip Girl, How I Met Your Father. Now there's a new Wizards of Waverly Place. I feel like Girl Meets World on Disney Channel was like the first to really do it and bring back Boy Meets World and bring us back into like that universe. But it's just a lot. I didn't like any of those. Let's go through the reboots that I've watched and I don't love. Let's start with Gossip Girl. The new age Gossip Girl, which is now canceled. Didn't work out, I think, for obvious reasons. I've seen a lot of discussion about old money and the fascination around that. Gossip Girl, the OG show, was old money New York. And we saw these teenagers who had trust funds and like their parents and grandparents had companies. It was old money, white New York. And that's what people wanted to see at the time. They wanted to uncover like how rich are the rich? How rich are the 1%? What do white parties in the Hamptons look like? What do rich high schoolers, what does that type of drama look like? Because it goes far beyond like, oh my gosh, like I didn't get to go to prom, Like it was just such a universe so different from the rest of the world that we wanted to peek inside. Now, the new Gossip Girl reboot was a more diverse take on that. But the main character was an influencer. And while not everyone loves influencers, of course, I think that there's something to be said about like this girl has to work for her following. This girl has to earn something, earn her success. Whereas the original was not like that. Also, they reveal who Gossip Girl is in the first episode, which I think, that was the entire allure of the first series, like the original series. Like, yes, all this drama is happening. You get a peek inside of the New York 1%. But ultimately, who is Gossip Girl, the titular character? In the reboot, they gave it away right away. Obviously, that was their attempt in like switching it up. I don't think it worked. Okay, so that's Gossip Girl. Raven's Home. A lot of reboots do this because the original characters are old, respectfully, where there's the main cast missing a few, and then there's the cast's kids. I don't care about those kids. I don't want to know. I just don't care. Shows like Raven's Home and the new Wizards of Waverly Place, like obviously I'm not the audience, the demographic for the audience, but it positions you in a weird space where it's like, okay, you have the older fans of the original show that we're rebooting for, but then we have this new generation, and I don't think anyone has been able to like bridge the gap between these two things in a show that the original cast are just parents of the new cast. Then we have shows like How I Met Your Father, which was just, it was supposed to be How I Met Your Mother from like a female perspective. But there was no blood relation to the original show. And I think that I don't know. That felt like an example of like, okay, you can't just take like 5 new characters in their 20s and like kind of put them in a similar space and just call it How I Met Your Father. It didn't feel related whatsoever. They didn't, yes, the show took place in New York, but it just, How I Met Your Father didn't work out because they didn't build the relationships within the cast that How I Met Your Mother did. To me, in the original show, it was very, like, you could see how Ted, Lily, and Marshall were all best friends from college. You could see how that story develops. You can see the flashbacks. It just makes sense how they're all connected. Robin's a friend, and then Barney. Like, it just worked. Whereas in the new show, we have like this half-sibling situation that doesn't really make sense. They didn't really know each other like that. I just didn't see the chemistry between any of the characters. And so the friendships fell flat. Whatever. I could keep going on about the sitcom reboots that didn't work out for me, but I would like to get into the sitcom reboots that did work out for me. 2 in particular were Bel-Air on Peacock and Sabrina the Teenage Witch, which I think was a Netflix original. Both of these shows were reimaginings of the original show. So we have essentially the same premise and the same setting, but in a wildly different circumstance. I wouldn't even call either of these shows sitcoms. And I feel like they took like the general idea of each character, and both of these shows were like a dramatization. Oh my God, dramatization of the original shows. So the original shows were more lighthearted, they were more comedies, and these ones are more intense, arguably thrillers, depending on how you view it. But I think the reboots were able to flesh out these characters and give all of them their own storylines and motives in a way that a sitcom can't really traditionally do, or would have to take way more time doing. I don't know what I'm talking about. I just like, if you watch the shows, you will know what I'm talking about. So please watch those shows and then circle back. We need to discuss. So, okay. So with all of that being said, with all of my complaining and all of my woes being expressed, I want to cover a couple shows that I think deserve a reboot and they should try their hand at. First off, Gilmore Girls. The thing about Gilmore Girls is that Stars Hollow itself, Stars Hollow, the setting, was a character in and of itself. And I think that a series where we still have Luke's, we still have Miss Patty's dance studio, we have all of the traditions, the Dragonfly Inn, so on and so forth. I think that Gilmore Girls is a show where if they rebooted it, included all new characters, it would still feel like Gilmore Girls. Obviously, the titular characters probably wouldn't be involved, or they could have a cousin whose last name is Gilmore. I'm not sure. They could work it out. But the setting was so strong of a character that I think they could tell any story within the context of Stars Hollow, Yale, Chilton, and it would still feel like Gilmore Girls. Number 2, Freaks and Geeks. Freaks and Geeks only got to like 2 seasons. And I think that it was primarily because all of the actors in the show kind of blew up and did their own thing pretty soon after. But I think it's a relatable story, and I think the idea of following a story of like high school burnouts, that's funny. Like, that is funny and relatable in so many ways, and I think a lot of people could relate to that type of story. We need to bring Freaks and Geeks back. We didn't even explore it the first time. So, yeah, of course I want to circle back to it. Next, and this is crazy because it's not a sitcom, it's a reality show, we need to bring back The Hills in Laguna Beach. I think a couple years ago, they made a show for the Hype House. Let me look that up, actually. Oh, God. LOL. Okay, if you didn't watch The Hills or Laguna Beach, it followed a group of high school students. Laguna Beach was the high school version of them, and then it evolved into, like, young adulthood in the Hills, in the Hollywood area. It was a reality show in the early 2000s, and I just think that if they brought it back, under the Hills and Laguna Beach IP, it could work. They made a Hype House show in 2022. It was not renewed for a season 2, or rather it was rumored to be renewed, but then there was like scheduling issues and they couldn't do a season 2 in 2023. Honestly, I think if they dropped all those kids into a Laguna Beach Hills IP, people would watch it. Once again, I think that while there were main characters in Laguna Beach and the Hills, it's primarily a story, not even a story, it's documenting what life is like in Hollywood and in like a beach town in Laguna Beach, like what real teenagers are doing during this time. I think Hype House is now, they've kind of grown out of the age that people would watch. But once again, if you just drop a bunch of high schoolers into a beautiful setting, I think people would tune in. My first thought regarding a reboot like this is basically what Summer Break did on YouTube years ago. I was a high schooler watching Summer Break episodes on YouTube as if it was the Hills and Laguna Beach. They could just bring it back under the same IP. It's a California beach lifestyle reality show. Sure, there's drama along the way. You can schedule some trips to like, you know, make it more interesting. But like, I think the characters, Lauren Conrad, Spencer Pratt, Brody Jenner, like all those people, like, yeah, like they were cool, they were impactful, but like ultimately you could just do the same thing with a group of teenagers. Bring back the Hills and Laguna Beach. I'll tune in. Lastly, another show that comes to mind, and it might be a little too soon for something like this, but I think Victorious should have continued. It's quirky, it's funny. I think the premise of going to like a performing arts high school in California is inherently interesting. They could drop in any kids with the same tropes, and I think it would still work because it's so outlandish. But I think people would want to watch what high school looks like in a performing arts setting. Yeah, so anyway, that was my rant. That was my rant on the reboot culture that we have right now. Those were my suggestions on which reboots are worth watching or would be worth watching if they made them, and which reboots flopped and why. I'm not against reboots because, like I said, I'm a nostalgia girl in my heart. I love the 90s and early 2000s. I think there was a certain magic to things that were being created at that time, but I don't think that the feat is impossible. I think that there's a tasteful way to do reboots, and I hope that we explore them further, but with more intention. Okay, that's it. Love you so much. Bye.